Okay, it's fine.
So I'm just going to introduce you. Thank you very much. So our first presenter today is, I want to get the title of her presentation correct. Our first presenter is Madison Bryant. Madison has completed her PDC-EAL certificate, and she worked on the topic, creating a culturally inclusive environment to facilitate school success, a team approach. Madison's short bio, is in the brochure, so you can read up on that. I don't want to take up valuable time through the introduction, but thank you very much for being here, Madison, and go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. This is kind of a nice little cozy group, so that's nice. So yeah, you know what my topic is, and we'll just jump right in, I guess. So I do have speaking notes. I was telling Nadia I don't tend to stick to them too much. I like to talk a little bit more, but I will just read part of this, so like what we're learning today. So this is when I did create this presentation, it was kind of like a learning module, which we can still look at it like that. So you'll spend some time exploring your personal beliefs about culturally responsive teaching and learning environments. You'll also learn more about the benefits of a team-based approach when establishing culturally responsive school and classroom environments. So we're going to talk a lot about the roles of leadership, the roles of teachers, and the roles of families when it comes to supporting English language learners. So the goal of this presentation is to encourage classroom teachers, EAL instructors, and any other school staff to take personal steps towards learning more about CRT and understanding which resources and strategies they can use to facilitate school and student success. So hearing from some of the people who are here, I know there's probably lots of you who know a lot more than me, but this topic is super interesting, and I hope that you can come away with it with just some practical examples and things you can use for yourselves in your teaching. So this is just a little about me. Right now I'm teaching grade 2 French immersion at École Victoria School here in Saskatoon. I'm in my 6th year of teaching, having previously taught grades 1 through 3. And yeah, so I'm enjoying it so far. And teaching in French was what kind of got me interested in taking the PDC-EAL certificate, just because I think learning languages is super fun, and I wanted to learn more about how to teach them. So yeah, I live in Saskatoon, and those are my 2 cats and my dog. So that's Mary, Pippin, and Evie. So they're at home right now. So this is just a quick order of presentation. You'll kind of see what we're going to go through. I won't go through this too much here, but just like we'll talk about why I chose the topic. We'll do a little self-reflection, and we'll look at a concept map of all the key things I'm going to touch on. I included a Mentimeter activity. Does anyone know what Mentimeter is? So it's like a good thing for us to be able to talk with each other and give ideas, kind of like Jamboard. Previously, I used Jamboard, but Jamboard doesn't exist anymore. And then we'll talk briefly about the home language. I know that Kim is going next, and she's going to dive deeper into that, but we'll just touch on that, and then we'll just look at some additional resources that you guys can look at later if you'd like. So this is kind of an overview of everything we're going to touch on. So I'm going to start at the top bubble there, talking about why CRT, why culturally responsive teaching, why is it important, and what it is. So there's some information there, but we'll dive into that after. Then we'll move on to what is culture and why is it relevant. We'll talk about how it's a reflection and tradition and lifestyle, and how we can pull culture into the classroom and pull education into culture to support English language learners. Then we'll get more into the team-based approach, and we'll have some examples for teachers, leadership, and families, things that each of those groups can do to support students. And then we'll get into some specific CRT strategies, like multilingual bulletin boards, resources in community languages, things you guys may have probably heard already, but we'll dive into that a little. And then we'll finish with the importance of the first language. So when I was in this class, it was ECR 493, we were given a lot of freedom to pick any kind of topic with regards to like EAL that we are interested in. And the first thing that popped in my mind was a story of a student I had. So I think it was 2 or 3 years of teaching. I taught online with the Online Learning Center. So that was a very interesting experience teaching 26 grade ones French immersion through a screen. And one of my students, we'll just call her Maya for today, she was very quiet, never really wanted to participate, often had her camera off, her microphone was muted. And it wasn't until around the months of November, December when we started our traditions unit as a class. I don't know if anyone teaches primary, but that's super important in K to 3. We talk about all the holidays and celebrations. And it was time for her to present her tradition to the class, where I asked them to present a family tradition or it could be a cultural tradition and just share a little bit about what they do. And that day was her turn. She turned her camera on and she was wearing a full sari and she had a dia with her of talking about Diwali. And she was just so excited. I almost was like, I've never heard you speak before. But she was just so engaged and so excited to like share a bit about her culture with us. And it was at like, I just thought back to this when I was doing this presentation, how that can engage students so much when they get to talk about something that's important to them. And culture and like the family background you come from is so important and needs to be like at the forefront of teachers' minds, just like when it comes to our lessons and the things we're doing, because it really gives them a sense of agency too. Like they're like, I want to do this because this is really interesting to me. Um, so that's a little story about Maya. And then also to teacher awareness and support. When I first started teaching, I didn't say this yet, but I went through the SUNTEP program. So I'm a Métis educator too. And we talked a lot about how in the school we're trying to encourage that teaching, right? Where we talk about Indigenous cultures. But so many teachers, when I started teaching, were scared to do it. Like if they weren't from that culture, they were like, I don't know where to start. I don't want to offend people. I don't know what resources there are. So that was one reason I wanted to do this too, was to find like things that I can bring to my colleagues at my schools and be like, look, you can use this resource and don't be scared to try and teach about cultures you're not familiar with. And then also personal bias and beliefs. The bias I'm referring to was kind of for myself, like when I first started teaching, there was so much to do. And like, how many of you were like classroom teachers? Like, like remembering back to your first and second years where you're like, oh my goodness, how am I going to even think about culture and all this stuff when I'm just trying to manage like 25, 26 kids, like, you know? So that personal bias and belief, like, I can't do it just because it's like too much. Hopefully, with this team based approach, you see like you have support and like it's not just you doing it. So that's why I chose this topic. I think is pretty cool. So moment of self-reflection, you can either talk with like your table buddy or you can just think to yourself some of these questions. So like number one, when you picture a culturally responsive classroom, what do you see in that classroom? And like what do you hear? So you walk into that room and you're like, yeah, I think they're doing a good job with this, you know? Like for myself, I think like do the students feel like they have a voice? Are they feeling like they're active participants or is it just the teachers telling them what to do? You know, like this is what we're going to learn. Having the students engage and bring in their cultural background and like prior knowledge, that would be another thing. Also, number two, on a scale from 1 to 10, just think to yourself, like if this applies to you, I know we're all kind of in different spaces, but how much of an effort have you put towards creating your own culturally responsive classroom or even in your workplace? Are you working to be a culturally responsive educator yourself? And then also scale of 1 to 10, how do you feel your school community is doing it or your workplace as a whole? Are they incorporating that in their buildings too? And then I also want you to think about like the things you want to learn through this presentation. So what do you want to learn more about CRT, culturally responsive teaching? Think about those questions and I'm hoping I answer them through the presentation and there'll be some time after for some questions, but just try to think about what you're hoping to learn through this. Does anyone want to share anything from that? It's okay if you don't. Okay, that's fine. So yeah, what is CRT? I'm like, I haven't even turned my page. I don't even know where I am on here. I told you I don't look at it. So CRT stands for culturally responsive teaching. This is a term that was coined by Gloria Ladson Billings in the mid 1990s. And this concept not only considers ELL's strengths and cultures, but it actively works to incorporate them into the classroom environment. So it looks at things like their culture, their prior experiences. We think of maybe if you have like refugee students, you pull those and you think about the experiences they had in school, and you use that to better teach them now in the current environment that they're in. Um, it also, there's 4 fundamental pillars, which include using student cultural knowledge, like I said, experiences and prior knowledge to facilitate learning, incorporating student cultural orientations to design compatible classroom environments, using a variety of assessment styles, which teachers should be doing anyways, but just special consideration for sure when we're having students from different backgrounds, and then equipping students to function in mainstream cultures. And another piece that's really important, they put a lot of emphasis on educators training themselves in this too. So, addressing your personal biases and cultural assumptions that you might have, it's important that educators are always trying to better themselves so that they can be better for their students. So it also mentions how cultural relevant pedagogy rests on 3 criteria. So that's just this bottom section here. It says students must experience academic success. That's like our goal, biggest goal. We're using cultural knowledge and teaching to give them and help them with like academic success. That's the goal. Students must develop and or maintain cultural competence. Who's heard the term cultural competence before? A few of you. So we're going to watch a video on that, which really, when I was learning about it, really helped to make it make more sense. And then also students must develop a critical consciousness. And then I just included this Ladson Billings. It's not a quote, but it's kind of a I don't know, a subtopic they brought up, how it's not so much about inserting culture into education. Like, let's just do this one unit on, like I mentioned, holidays. If that was the only thing I was doing, that's not being culturally responsive. That's just kind of like, here, I did it and I'm done. It's about inserting education into culture. So culture is like the big thing. It's all involved, so it's all wrapped in together. So that's really important. This video is talking about why CRT. It does refer to it as CRS, like culturally responsive schooling, but I do just want to watch it. It's about 1.5 minutes, I think, and hopefully the sound works. I think should be good. Okay, let's see what happens here when I click it. Hey, there we go. The audio is not the best in this video, but just try your best. Okay, so just some key points from that video. Um, the one thing that really stood out to me was the lady at the end who said we want practical examples. I find even going to PD sessions like at school and stuff, sometimes I'm like, this sounds really great, but how do I implement it? So I'm really hoping that today through this presentation you can at least come away with like 3 good practical examples and things you can do to become more culturally responsive. Also, it talked about how the school setting has changed, which we're all aware of. Like even when I was in elementary school, it's very different, the way, like the classroom that I see now, and we need to adapt to that as teachers. Also, like it talks about how to teach with students in their cultural background. We must consider that when planning our instruction. And there are lots of diverse ways of learning that are culturally specific. So really paying attention to the cultures that are coming, like the different backgrounds coming into your rooms, is going to benefit you. I do have one more video. It's a little bit longer. It's not super long though. We're gonna watch about 3 minutes of it, which is talking about cultural competence. And I really like the examples that the lady gives, or I think it's the lady gives in the video. So let's watch that one once we close this. Oops. All right. Or no, it's a guy. Never mind. Is that loud enough? I don't know. Okay, I'm gonna stop it there. I really like that video. I like those examples. It makes me think of another example I heard actually like a week ago from a teacher telling me that in some cultures, eye contact with someone in authority is considered disrespect. So you think of I've even done that with my own students this year. Like I'm talking to you, like why aren't you looking at me? Which I don't think it was for them. It was a cultural thing, but still, you have to have that in the back of your mind. And that's a part of being culturally competent is like learning those things for yourself so that you don't have those assumptions that are incorrect. So that's a really good example. And then another thing I picked from this was that cultural competence is one of the most misunderstood aspects of like what we're supposed to be as educators and what our goal is. Like sometimes people think, okay, I'm culturally competent because like the example in that was I hang a Mexican flag or I talk about my trip to Japan and that's enough. But it's not. That's kind of more, I don't know if it's tokenistic. I don't know if I don't know if that's the term maybe, but just like it's not really getting in deep, and what they need. So the different worship methods in church can be used as a tool. So that was a really good example. Like what's appropriate here might not be appropriate there. So just keeping that in the back of our minds as educators, like we want to always be learning and growing our own cultural competence so we can best support all our different learners and cultures coming in. um, I'm just going to pause that. So, what is culture and why is it important? I found that learning about culture was super interesting because a lot of the times people think it's like just one it's one thing, but it's so much more than that. And we're going to talk about how culture is like super a very deep topic that you can't just learn in one seminar. This is a quote from Helmer and Eddy. It says, "Culture is not innate; it is handed down from adult to child, and this transmission takes place in both formal and informal settings, including school and home." And I emphasize the word school because that's kind of where we come in as educators. Later in this module, we'll be looking at the various roles the school plays in establishing culturally responsive learning environments. So school is very important because if you think about it, they're with us like most of the day. So it's important that we are teaching ourselves all these important things to support them. But looking at culture, who's seen a picture like this before? The cultural iceberg or any kind of depiction of an iceberg like this, where you have the surface and then you have what's down deep. So I really like this is The Cultural Iceberg by Edward T. Hall. And it talks about how culture is fluid and multifaceted. So it's not just the things like when I was learning all this and I was like, oh, culture, that's just, the food that people eat, the clothes they wear, the music they listen to. And all those things are great, like to incorporate in your rooms with your students. That's great, but you need to consider the things that are down deep too. And this is really small. But if you guys want me to share this, I can like the presentation with you, but you can also Google it, just the cultural iceberg. But it talks about how deeper things of culture, like communication styles, like I mentioned, eye contact, facial expressions, gestures, notions of courtesy and manners. That's a big one because certain things that are considered like rude in North America aren't rude in other cultures. So we have to think about that. Concepts of like gender roles and like power of authority, like how we view authority, that kind of stuff. Attitudes towards elders is a big one, and like even like attitudes towards animals. So there was an example I heard too of you, or even like just culture of like Canada, let's say you're doing a math thing with them and you're like giving an example about hockey or like something very Canadian. You need to be kind of careful with that because they might, your new students, newcomers might be like, what? I don't relate to that. So that doesn't really benefit them. Then also to approaches to like religion, courtship. I mean, courtship, not so much important with our students, but still good to know those things. There's a quote here from the no, not on this one. Sorry, never mind. That's next slide. But there's a quote here from Helmer and Eddy. So culture is a reflection of tradition, lifestyle, and patterned ways of dealing with the world, including those unwritten rules for expectations or routines, as well as rules for work and play. So unwritten, we need to try our best to like learn about those things so that we don't, I don't know, have biases and like stuff like that, and bring those assumptions into our rooms. So I want to start now to talk about what was on the first page of my presentation, which is the team-based approach. So when I made this presentation, I broke it down into 3 parts: teachers, leadership. And when I was thinking leadership, I was thinking like my principal and like the school board. And then there's families. Obviously, the student is also a piece of this, but I was looking at it more from this is the support for the student. So obviously, there's things they would do for their own agency, but I want to focus on these 3. So we're working as a team to achieve culturally responsive environments. So starting with the role of teachers, who is anyone here like a classroom teacher right now? Are we all like, yeah, okay. So, or has been classroom teacher? You guys, there's a few hands for that. So number 1, I actually switched my presentation around. I put number one as knowing your learners. I think that's number one. That's so important that when they come in, you do not only interest inventory. Who's heard of interest inventories? Where you're like, what kind of movies do you like? What's your favorite superhero? Sports and all that stuff. That's great. But you can also do like a cultural inventory, which I actually did for the first time this year with my students. It was a little cultural, what was it, like a little project they took home and they filled it out with their families. Just kind of like, where is your family from? Like, it could be, well, we've always been from Saskatoon, so I don't know what my culture is. But still, it was a good way to talk about, like, okay, what traditions do you guys have? Do you have any special family foods? And some students brought in, like, well, actually, yeah, we're from India. We moved here a year ago. And then kind of opened the door to that conversation and gave me a look, like a look into their lives a little bit. There was also a question on there of like, are there any other languages in the home? So that's important for me to know. I always found out that like later, just in talking with them, oh yeah, my mom doesn't speak English. And it's like doing this cultural inventory with them. I had that information right off the bat. So knowing your learners is super important. Acknowledging our own biases and avoiding cultural assumptions. So obviously, as humans, we have our own like thoughts about things, and it's just we always have to be actively fighting against those. Like, don't just assume because someone's from somewhere that this is how they're going to be, or they're not going to prioritize this as much as this student will. And by working towards cultural competence for yourself, that will help you to avoid those two things. A simple like a tangible like practical thing is classroom library, including books and community languages. For myself, that's kind of hard because being a French immersion teacher, it's like we have to have only French. K-3 is like you K-2, I mean, is like all French all the time. But when you're working with your ELLs, you can make sure that there's books and community language. Just a simple thing you can do for that. It also says here, this is where the Ministry of Education quote was that I was thinking of. It says, culturally responsive educators must maintain their own socio-cultural consciousness. So that's where it's like it's on you to keep working on that, while also keeping high expectations for their learners, like, you know, avoiding assumptions, acknowledging their personal experiences, all of which will inform their culturally responsive teaching practices. That's from 2012. I think it's still very relevant. So that's a good quote. Role of leadership. Who here would anyone fall in that kind of realm? Like you're like school board, you know, you're like one of the like role of leadership, right? You are the ones like this quote here from Coelho says, the relationship with the school begins at the moment when the family enters the main entrance of the school. So I think of like my principal at school and my vice principal, like are they, and I think they are, they're doing awesome, you know, doing that to create that initial environment to support all our learners. We have a very diverse school, which I love. And like last year was like my most like like a very culturally diverse classroom. It was really fun. So I feel like establishing the initial environment, a lot of that does fall on leadership. Teachers obviously get to help with that. So making sure your school is an environment that supports different cultures and also providing professional learning opportunities. So when it comes to like PD sessions or staff meeting time, conversations should like that should be a priority just because our schools are changing so much. So providing that learning time. Financial support now. This one, I don't really know what control principals have with like the budget or even like leadership. I don't know how that's allocated, but if there's a time for them to say, okay, we have budget for this, maybe let's put it towards cultural competence, cultural like some type of PD session for our teachers or physical resources, you know, books for teachers to read and like all that stuff. So putting financial support towards that area. Providing time to collaborate, that's a really practical way, I think, for leadership to help support the school. So, like, maybe instead of a staff meeting, like talking all together, you give time to like collaborate with their peers. Because that comes back to what I mentioned about teachers being afraid to do certain things. Like they're like, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to teach about Diwali and Ramadan because I don't know a lot about it. But you might have a colleague in your building who does. And so giving time to collaborate and like share ideas really helps take that stress away. And then also leadership also they need to be responsive leaders themselves. So doing their own research, learning, lifelong learners, we hear that, they need to be doing that too. So that's leadership. And then also families, which like families is so important, like almost like number one. I don't know, maybe because like that's where they have their language model in the first place. So the second point here, like using their L1, their first language in the home, we should be encouraging that still, not saying no, just English, just speak English, because we're going to learn in the next presentation how important the home language is in giving and helping the students towards academic success. So number one is families need to be included in equitable ways. As we know, families come from different backgrounds. They might have different levels of English in the home, but all families and all cultures should be included in fair ways and feel welcome in the school, welcome to give their opinions. I had one thing here about the families, like oftentimes immigrant families experience one-sided communication from the school. So the school's sharing like this is what's happening. It's not so much a conversation where they can give their input, and that comes back to like they have so much to share. So providing time for them to do that, whether it's I don't know, like parent meetings, there's parent council, providing I couldn't think of the word yesterday, translators where they come and if they don't speak English, have that available. Interpreter, that's the word. Both my husband and I, we could not think of it, and I forgot to Google it. Thank you. Interpreters. We do have those for parent teacher interviews, which is great, but even at parent council, that'd be really cool. This other quote here, it says like viewing a language barrier as a mean for exclusion is another form of marginalization that immigrant families experience. So it's important that we try to, with all the technology today, we can just get rid of that. Like I have families who I've met with one-on-one, they'll have a recording device and it'll translate for them right in the moment. So there's no excuse to say like they can't participate, just because they can't speak English. The other thing I was going to say, there was something important about that. I can't think of it. That's okay. I'll come back to it. But yeah, having them be a part of it is really important. Oh, that's what I was going to say. I have an example of the role of families. So I mentioned how last year my classroom was really diverse. I had like so many different cultures and it was really awesome. I was able to incorporate families into the classroom last year because they came and talked about, we did the traditions unit, and they came and each had a chance to talk about their family tradition. And I have never seen my students so engaged in something. First of all, having their family there, having their parents there, they were so excited. They were also so excited to share a part of themselves that's so important to them. Like I'm not even kidding. Like you think of all the major holidays, I had a parent for each one, and it was awesome. So anytime you can like incorporate that, it's really really cool to see. Um, so now just looking at some specific CRT strategies and activities that you can do. Number one, we already talked about a bit, knowing your learners, activating student prior knowledge. So one example is, I think I mentioned this later, but identifying like cognates. You guys, do you know what a cognate is? Like where the word sounds the same, right? The example I can give, because the only other language I speak is French. Like I think of hockey and hockey, like that's the same pretty much. So like a lot of the times too, activating their prior knowledge, even if it's not a cognate, they know like what a dog is, right? You say chien if that's their first language, French. You know what a dog is. You don't have to teach them that. You're just changing the label of it, right? So you're changing the cap. I think I heard that once in one of the books. So it's not chien, dog, and then you work through it that way. Um, Also, multilingual bulletin boards. I think I have examples on the next slide. These aren't my examples. This is just, and this is very important that I say, this is not all you're doing. This is like an extra thing. So like in the school, you could have a bulletin board with all the information in different languages. Now, I would recommend more so doing like a digital copy of this because I found lots of families like to copy and paste into Google Translate, unless you have it already translated. I'm saying if you have it in English, they copy and paste. If you have it in the other languages, that's a great way to do it. STEM around the world, just doing things to do with like the map and like talking about different places. You can learn about different cultures, different celebrations around the world. So that's an example of that. Also talking about, before I go to that again, this is an example. So the student I talked about at the beginning, Maya, this was her presentation. This was when we were online. So she had to kind of, this is what our templates look like. But she was asked to talk about her tradition. So she chose Diwali, and then she gave a dia lamp as an example of a item from her tradition. And so this is just another little thing you can do. And they really love this. This is like every year they love this unit. But we do talk about it all throughout the year. That's the thing. Like traditions and celebrations happen all throughout the year. We make sure to, we're constantly talking about it. Multicultural literature circles. So having conversations about like, you want to be careful not to just say, oh, you're all from the same culture, so let's put you in a group. You don't want to be doing that necessarily, but having different, like, you can learn about different cultures and like have books about them and kind of, I don't know, have stations like that. Or you can have different, you could do it like I've heard of people doing weekly, they learn a different word from a different language. Those are just some little ways to incorporate. Have you heard of like Mitchif Mondays? I've heard of those too. That's another way you can do it. And then learn, yeah, that's the learn about a new language each week. So simple little things you can do there. I did. Oh, this was another one. Oh, this was the Festival de Mioton. So it was this is a, I think this is a Chinese celebration. Like, and this was, yeah, he was talking about like manger du gâteau de lune, moon pies, I think, moon cakes or moon cakes. So talking about that, and they just talk about the foods they eat, and they get to present it, and it's really fun. So I do want to do this. I think we have time for this. I want to try this. You guys need your phones, and I just want to see what happens. Try and scan this QR code. I've never used Mentimeter before. And it's going to ask you, what are some ways you've seen culture brought into the classroom or culturally responsive teaching strategies? What have you seen? Let's see if this works. I'm going to be really happy if it does. I don't know if it will. Oh, cool. Okay, now let's see if I click this. Should open, but I don't know. Oh, yay. Cool. Yeah, so my husband wrote that one, celebrating diverse holidays. We were testing it out last night. So, yeah, why don't you just give some, if you have anything, some examples that you've seen? Yeah, no, that's good. Yeah, I hadn't heard about that. That's a good one. School-wide map showing where everyone's from, right? That's one of those simple, like, displays that you can put out. Culture quilt, paper squares submitted by students. Yep, we did a culture quilt last year. That was a part of our thing, and that was really fun. It was just, and they kind of saw how all these pieces make up who they are. So that was really cool. Books, artifacts from home, important holidays. You guys have so many. I thought this would be cool that if anyone wanted to like take a picture of this, also I will share this presentation. I think this should still be on here. But yeah, maybe take a picture of this if you do want some ideas for yourself. Cultural celebration evening with families. Yep. Yep. We just had for like French culture, we just had Carnaval not too long ago. And like students, I've never heard them speak so much French. It was so cool. Art projects on bulletin boards, celebrating different festivals. Yep. We're having also too at our school, we're having Irish dancers come. That's actually happening today. So my kids are excited for that. Yeah, this is great. Awesome. Thanks, you guys. I'm glad that worked. Mentimeter, if you ever want to use it, it was very easy to make. And it's free. Yeah. Okay. Are we done? Did everyone submit? Did anyone want to take a picture before I move on? Okay, we're good. Okay. I'll go back here then. Thank you for participating in that. Just about done here. Last thing I want to touch on, just check my time. I'm doing okay. Okay, so yeah, the home language, just kind of touch on that. I won't go too deep into that because I know you're going to be learning some great stuff from Kim. But the first thing I want to say, this is a quote from Ladson Billings. It says, if students' home language is incorporated into the classroom, students are more likely to experience academic success. And that is like, I read that in so many articles. Like, it's very much like a proven thing. Success in their L1 really is an indicator for their success learning English. So you don't want it to be like, okay, you're in school now to learn English. I don't want to hear your first language. We don't talk about it. You're learning English. That's very counterproductive, and we're going to talk a bit about why that is. So the home language is is the language that's acquired during early childhood, and it is a continued use of the L1 is a highly supported component of CRT. Using it in the classroom helps students to activate their prior knowledge. So like I said, these students who come in, they know a lot of things. It's just not in English. So you can tap into that knowledge to help teach English. So like I gave the example of like showing a picture of a dog and they might say chien. You're like, hey, chien, dog. that can really just a simple way to help with that. Also, what was I gonna? Yes, ways to incorporate their L1 include multilingual classroom displays, books in community languages, and then intentionally identifying cognates between English and the various home languages. Some home languages will have more, some will have none, so that doesn't always work, but just try and identify those where you can. And then it's also evident that ELLs use all of their linguistic resources when they're learning a new language. So when they're reading and writing as well. So for example, one thing I think of with just I keep going back to French just because that's what I know. Like teaching reading, if they can decode in English, they understand the concept of putting these sounds together and then making a word. You don't really. That's not the confusion. They know that skill, so you can tap into that skill, but try and apply it to the new language. Um, so yeah, that's kind of how we would incorporate it. Here it says allow students to work with those who speak the same language. Just be careful with that. Don't always just assume because they speak the same language, I'm just going to always put them together. That's not always beneficial. And sometimes they might speak the same language, but they may be from a different culture. So there might be like cultural differences there too. So just be careful with doing that. But yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to touch on with that. And then, so yeah, in conclusion, we talked about why CRT, why it's important, and why it's beneficial. You guys did a bit of reflection. We talked about culture. We talked about the roles of teachers, leadership, and families. We briefly went over some strategies and activities, but you do have that in your pamphlet. So I do want you to make sure you look at that. And there is some more in the handout too, things that you can I keep saying tangible, but more practical applications is the word I'm looking for. And then we briefly mentioned the home language, which I think is a great segue to our next presentation. Here's some keywords and the glossary. If you guys, like I said, if you want this presentation, there's some keywords here that we touched on and just some resources. I do have a couple minutes. I want to see if this will let me log in. Has anyone tried the Wannaskewin website? Have any of you logged? Yeah, it's so good. So let's see if it lets me open it here. I don't know if it will. So if you go onto the website and you click learn, online learning. Now I have an account through Saskatoon Public. We have an account to log in, but I just want to show you I don't know how the public you can probably make an account, I'm sure. I'm not sure, but I'll just put in here. I have to remember what it is. Oh, I think I know. Is it going to show? Okay. Let's see if it lets me log in. This is a resource I use every year with my students. I usually do it in May and June. Oh, yay. To teach about different things. So if we click in here, in this course here, there's a bunch of lessons from Indigenous people with their knowledge and teachings that you can bring into your room. So there's some lessons about cultural awareness. I really like the lesson on dance styles and then bison walk. So if we click on dance styles, there's videos of some of the dances from powwows, and they do a little lesson about what the story is pertaining to the powwow dance, and then you get to watch them dance, and it's really cool. And like I said, I like to do it in May and June because there's lots of powwows you can take your students to, or you can take your kids to. So that one's really cool. Bison walk is also really interesting because she talks a lot about the bison, what it was used for traditionally. And we the things we know, it was used for so many different things. They used all the bison, and also the way that the bison and animals were viewed and are viewed in different Indigenous cultures. So really cool. And there's printable activities, there's things you can lesson plans, there's a lot to explore here. So I just wanted to highlight that resource. So that's the Wannaskewin online experience on Wannaskewin website. There's also some in this thing here. I want to check in your books though. Do I have these linked in yours on the back? I do? Okay, good. So you can find these on there too. So there's TED Talks talking about culturally responsive pedagogy and so many other readings, articles that I found helpful. A lot of these helped me with preparing this presentation. Yeah, and that's kind of it for me. Thanks for listening, everyone.